There's a quiet lie most of us have accepted. It settles into our days so naturally that we stop questioning it. The belief that meaningful change requires massive, sweeping action. That to truly transform your life, you need to overhaul everything at once. Quit your job, move to a new city, wake up at 4 in the morning, and reinvent yourself before dawn. But here's what nobody tells you. The most profound shifts in a human life rarely come from grand gestures. They come from something far quieter, something so small it barely registers, until one day you look up and realize you are not the same person you were a year ago. 1 hour. That's it. 60 minutes out of the 1,440 that fill every single day of your life. A sliver of time so small that most of us spend it without thinking. Scrolling through our phones, and on watching television we barely remember, letting the day dissolve into nothing. What if that hour was yours? What if, instead of letting it drift away, you claimed it, protected it, used it with intention? This audiobook is about that hour. It's about the science behind why small, consistent action beats sporadic effort every time. It's about understanding the specific areas of your life, your mind, your body, your relationships, your finances, your creativity, your sense of inner peace, and learning how a single hour, applied deliberately in each direction, can shift the trajectory of everything. I want to be clear about what this is not. This is not a productivity hack. This is not a promise that 60 minutes a day will make you a millionaire by Tuesday. Life doesn't work that way. Anyone in any book that tells you otherwise is selling you something that doesn't exist. What this is, genuinely and without exaggeration, is a framework for becoming who you've always wanted to be, one reasonable, manageable, human-sized step at a time. The kind of change that compounds, that stacks, that becomes, after months and years of showing up, something extraordinary. Think about the people in your life who seem to have it figured out. The ones who are physically healthy, financially stable, intellectually sharp, deeply connected to the people they love. When you look closely, you'll almost never find a dramatic turning point in their story. What you find instead is a long, unglamorous string of small choices made consistently. A habit of reading every morning, a walk that never gets skipped, a weekly call with a friend, now a savings account that gets fed automatically, a journal written in every night. These things sound almost embarrassingly simple, and that's exactly why most people overlook them. Throughout this audiobook, we're going to walk through 10 areas of life, 10 chapters, each one dedicated to showing you how one focused hour in that domain can rewrite your story over time. We'll look at the research, we'll explore the psychology, and most importantly, we'll make it practical. Because the best idea in the world is worthless if you never act on it. By the time we reach the end, my hope is that you'll see time differently, not as something that's constantly running out, but as something you have far more control over than you've been led to believe. The question has never been whether you have time. The question is whether you're willing to use what you already have. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Myth of I Don't Have Time. If you've ever said, I just don't have the time, you're in excellent company. It's one of the most universal things a human being can say. Time, or the lack of it, has become the defining complaint of modern life. We are busier than ever, more scheduled, more connected, more demanded of, and yet somehow we feel like we're falling behind. But let's pause here for a moment and get honest with ourselves, because the truth about time is more uncomfortable than we usually let it be. The average person in the developed world spends somewhere between 3 and 5 hours per day on their phone. That's not counting time spent working. That's leisure screen time. Social media, videos, news, apps, games. Add in television, and that number climbs further still. Research consistently shows that Americans spend an average of 4 hours a day watching TV and another 3 or more on their smartphones. 7 hours. 7 hours that most of us spend largely on passive consumption, and then we turn around and say we don't have 60 minutes for something that could genuinely change our lives. Now, and this is important, I'm not saying any of that to shame you. Rest is real. Leisure matters. Watching something you love or scrolling through funny videos is not a moral failure. The problem isn't that we relax. The problem is that we confuse passive consumption with rest, and we confuse busyness with productivity. Here's the distinction that changes everything. There is a difference between time that restores you and time that simply passes. Watching a thoughtfully chosen film with someone you love can be deeply restorative. Mindlessly scrolling Instagram for 90 minutes and emerging feeling vaguely worse about yourself, that's not rest. That's time that passed. The myth of "I don't have time" persists because it protects us from a harder truth, that we do have time, but we haven't yet decided what we want to do with it. And decision, real decision, requires admitting what we value, which means admitting what we've been choosing not to value. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When our actions don't align with our values, the easiest resolution is not to change the action, it's to rewrite the narrative. And "I don't have time" is one of the most effective narratives ever invented, much because it positions us as the victims of circumstance rather than authors of choice. There's also the issue of energy, which is often more honest than time as an explanation. After a long day of work and family responsibilities, many people genuinely don't have the mental bandwidth for something demanding. And that's real. Exhaustion is real. This is why the when matters just as much as the how much. Research on cognitive function shows that decision fatigue accumulates throughout the day. By evening, our ability to make good choices, to resist the easier option, to initiate something new, is significantly lower than it was in the morning. This is why the most successful habit builders tend to anchor their most important hour early in the day, before the demands and noise of ordinary life crowd out intention. But not everyone is a morning person, and the research also shows that the best time is the time you'll actually use. Consistency trumps timing. An hour at 10 p.m. that actually happens beats a theoretically perfect 6 a.m. session that you snooze through every single day. So here's the practical starting point. Before we go any further into the content of what to do with your hour, you need to find it, not assume it, not plan for it in the abstract. Actually locate it. For the next 3 days, try something called a time audit. Track honestly where each hour of your day actually goes, not where you think it goes, where it actually goes. Most people who do this are genuinely surprised, sometimes stunned. The hour-long commute where the radio plays and you think nothing. The lunch break spent on social media. So the 30 minutes between putting the kids to bed and actually starting to wind down, where somehow the phone appeared in your hand. That time is not gone. It's just unassigned. And unassigned time, in the absence of intention, almost always flows toward whatever is easiest and most immediately stimulating, which in the modern world means a glowing screen designed by engineers whose entire job is to keep your attention. Your hour's in there, every single day. The question is simply whether you're willing to pull it back from the current and give it somewhere intentional to go. That's where the real work begins. Chapter 2, The Science of Small Habits. Before we dive into the specific ways you can use your hour, we need to understand something fundamental about how change actually happens in the human brain. Because the strategy this entire book is built on, small, consistent, daily action, is not just a motivational concept, it's neuroscience. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. It is constantly trying to convert intentional behaviors into automatic ones, because automation is efficient. Every time you perform an action, neurons fire in sequence. When that same sequence fires again and again, the pathway becomes stronger. The insulation around the neural fibers thickens, the signal travels faster, the behavior becomes easier, more natural, more like breathing. Neuroscientists call this myelination. We call it habit. And this process doesn't distinguish between good habits and bad ones. It simply responds to repetition. Your brain will automate whatever you practice, which is both a warning and a profound opportunity. The research behind habit formation, most famously documented by Charles Duhigg, B.J. Fogg, and James Clear, consistently points to the same fundamental structure: a cue, a routine, and a reward. When a behavior is triggered by a reliable cue, performed consistently, and followed by something the brain finds rewarding, it encodes into a habit loop. Over time, the cue alone becomes enough to initiate the behavior almost automatically. This is why tying your new hour to an existing anchor, a consistent time of day, a specific location, something you already do, dramatically increases the odds that it sticks. Researchers call this habit stacking. Want to read for an hour? Do it right after your morning coffee. Want to exercise? Go directly after dropping the kids at school. The existing behavior becomes the cue. The new behavior gets carried along in its wake. There's another piece of the science that often gets overlooked, and it's perhaps the most important: the compounding effect. We vastly overestimate what we can change in a week and catastrophically underestimate what we can change in a year. Mathematician and habits researcher James Clear uses a compelling illustration. If you get 1% better at something every day for a year, you don't end the year 1% better. You end it 37 times better. Tiny improvements, compounded daily, produce staggering results. The inverse is equally true. Tiny erosions, compounded over the same period, lead to dramatic decline. 1 hour of reading per day translates to roughly 18 to 24 books per year, depending on your pace. For the average adult who reads 1 or 2 books annually, that's a 15-fold increase, achieved not through any heroic effort, but simply by showing up for 60 minutes. 1 hour of deliberate skill practice, what psychologist Anders Ericsson called deliberate practice, added daily to a weak skill will, within a year or two, produce a level of proficiency most people associate with natural talent. Except it has nothing to do with talent. It has everything to do with time, applied with focus. There's also the psychological reality of momentum. Behavioral science research shows that completing a small, intended action each day builds what psychologists call self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to do what you set out to do. Every morning you wake up and follow through on your hour, your brain receives evidence that you are someone who follows through. And identity, it turns out, is a powerful driver of behavior. People act in ways that are consistent with who they believe themselves to be. This is why tiny wins matter so much at the beginning. The hour itself is almost secondary to the identity it begins to construct. You don't start an hour of reading every day to read books. You start it to become someone who reads, someone who learns, someone who invests in their mind. Once that identity takes root, the behavior tends to sustain itself. Because now it isn't just a habit, it's who you are. One more thing the science tells us: friction is the enemy of behavior change, and smoothness is its greatest ally. If your running shoes are buried in the closet, you'll run less. If they're sitting by the door, you'll run more. Research on what's called environmental design shows that reducing the physical and mental obstacles between you and a desired behavior is one of the most reliable ways to make it happen. Set your book on the kitchen table. Put your journal next to your coffee maker. Keep your yoga mat unrolled on the floor. Make the hour easier to start than to skip. Because on the days when motivation is low, and those days will come, it won't be passion that keeps you going. It will be proximity. The simple fact that the thing you need is right there, already out, already waiting. Small habits are not a compromise. They are not the consolation prize for people who can't manage big change. They are the mechanism through which all lasting change happens. The people who understand this, really understand it in their bones, stop waiting for the right moment and start using the ordinary ones. Chapter 3, 1 hour for your mind. Reading and learning. The human brain is not a fixed thing. For much of the 20th century, scientists believed that once the brain reached adulthood, its structure was largely set. That you were, in terms of intelligence and capability, roughly who you were going to be. We now know this is spectacularly wrong. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize, form new connections, and functionally change in response to experience, continues throughout a human lifetime. Every time you learn something new, something physical happens in your brain. Synaptic connections form or strengthen. Gray matter density can actually increase in regions associated with the skill you're developing. The brain you have today is not the brain you have to keep. And the most accessible, most portable, and most democratically available tool for shaping that brain is one of the oldest technologies humans have ever created: reading. Studies from Yale University found that adults who read books for 30 minutes or more daily lived an average of nearly 2 years longer than those who didn't read at all, even after controlling for factors like wealth, education, and health. Regular reading is associated with reduced cognitive decline in aging, lower rates of Alzheimer's disease, and measurably greater emotional intelligence. It reduces stress more effectively than listening to music, taking a walk, or drinking a cup of tea. Within 6 minutes of reading, measurable stress levels drop. But the case for reading isn't just biological, it's civilizational. Books are compressed wisdom. A single book represents thousands of hours of someone's thinking, research, and lived experience, distilled into something you can consume in a few hours. The person who reads consistently is, in a very real sense, continuously absorbing the insights of brilliant minds across history, scientists, philosophers, entrepreneurs, artists, generals, healers, and integrating those insights into their own understanding of the world. How you use your reading hour matters. Passive reading, eyes moving across words while the mind drifts elsewhere, produces far less learning than active engagement. Researchers who study reading comprehension consistently find that readers who pause to reflect, who ask questions of the text, who connect what they're reading to what they already know, they retain dramatically more information than those who simply move through pages. A simple practice. Every 15 minutes or so, stop, close the book or set it down. Ask yourself, what did I just learn? How does this connect to something I already know? How could I use this? This adds almost no time to your reading session and doubles or triples how much you actually retain. Beyond books, the hour you dedicate to your mind can take many forms. Structured online courses, platforms like Coursera, EDX, Masterclass, or Khan Academy allow you to develop skills at any level, from basic to graduate. Podcasts on intellectual topics, listened to actively with the intention to remember and apply, can transform a commute into a learning session. Language learning, which carries its own remarkable cognitive benefits, including improved executive function and delayed dementia, can be meaningfully progressed in an hour per day. What matters most is that the hour is dedicated to genuine learning, not passive entertainment dressed up as education. The distinction is engagement. Are you being challenged? Are you encountering something you didn't know before? Are you having to think? One of the more counterintuitive findings in learning science is what researchers call desirable difficulty. The brain learns best not when things are easy, but when they're just hard enough to require effort, but not so hard that they become overwhelming. This is the sweet spot of cognitive growth, slightly beyond where you're comfortable, but not so far beyond that you shut down. Seek that edge in your daily reading hour. Don't only read books you're certain you'll enjoy. Reach occasionally for the one that intimidates you, the one in the field you've always been curious about but never felt smart enough to understand. That discomfort is not a warning sign. It's the feeling of your brain growing. In a world drowning in information, the person who learns how to learn, who cultivates a daily habit of reading and intellectual engagement, holds a remarkable advantage, not because they become smarter in some abstract sense, but because they keep accumulating the raw material of good decisions, knowledge, perspective, nuance, the ability to see patterns others miss. Give your mind an hour every day, it will give you back a lifetime. Chapter 4. 1 hour for your body. Movement and health. Of all the hours this audiobook is going to ask you to reclaim, this is the one where the evidence is most overwhelming, most consistent, and most impossible to argue with. The research on physical movement and human health is not nuanced. It does not have two sides. The case for 1 hour of intentional movement per day is one of the most ironclad conclusions in all of medicine. Regular physical activity reduces the risk of heart disease, the leading cause of death in most developed countries, by up to 35%. It reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes by a similar margin. It is associated with significantly lower rates of certain cancers, particularly colon and breast cancer. It reduces chronic pain, improves sleep quality, strengthens bones, and extends healthy life expectancy by years, sometimes decades. But the physical benefits, while staggering, are almost secondary to what movement does for the brain. Exercise is, without exaggeration, the single most powerful intervention known to science for mental health. It relieves depression as effectively as antidepressant medication, in some studies more effectively, and does so without side effects. It reduces anxiety. It improves executive function, memory, and focus. It stimulates the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which neuroscientist John Rady has called miracle grow for the brain, a protein that promotes the growth of new brain cells and supports the survival of existing ones. You exercise not just to look better, you exercise to think better, feel better, and live longer, every single time. The question most people get stuck on is what kind of movement, and here the science is mercifully forgiving. The research does not require you to run marathons, join a CrossFit gym, or develop a love for swimming laps. The most consistent finding across the literature is that the best exercise is the one you will actually do consistently. Walking, simple, free, accessible walking, is one of the most thoroughly studied and validated forms of exercise in existence. A brisk 60-minute walk delivers meaningful cardiovascular benefit, significantly reduces stress hormones, supports bone density, and provides a natural opportunity for mental digestion, for processing emotions, working through problems, and simply thinking. Many of history's most productive thinkers, from Charles Darwin to Friedrich Nietzsche to Steve Jobs, were devoted daily walkers who credited their walks as essential to their creative process. For those looking to go further, strength training deserves special mention for something it doesn't get enough credit for: longevity. Research shows that muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of both lifespan and quality of life in older age. People who maintain or build muscle strength into their 40s, 50s, and 60s are dramatically less likely to suffer from the functional decline that leads to loss of independence. An hour of resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, spread across a 7-day schedule, is enough to produce significant gains in strength and health markers. The practical challenge isn't usually knowledge. Most people know they should move more. The challenge is consistency. And consistency, as we established in the last chapter, comes from habit design. Choose a time for your movement hour and protect it the same way you'd protect a doctor's appointment. Make it non-negotiable, not because you're disciplined, but because you've built your environment to make skipping it harder than doing it. Sleep and movement are deeply intertwined. Regular exercise improves sleep quality, and adequate sleep, 7 to 9 hours for most adults, dramatically improves the body's ability to recover from exercise and regulate the hormones that control appetite, metabolism, and stress response. If your body hour is genuinely only 60 minutes, consider whether some of it might be better invested in protecting sleep. The hour spent in bed earlier instead of in front of a screen might, paradoxically, do more for your physical health than another hour at the gym. Nutrition deserves mention here, not because it fits neatly into an hour, but because the hour you might spend planning and preparing food is one of the highest return investments in physical health available. Studies show that people who cook at home consistently eat fewer calories, consume more nutrients, and have better overall diet quality than those who rely primarily on restaurants or packaged food. 1 hour of meal preparation, batch cooking on a Sunday afternoon, prepping vegetables for the week, cooking something simple but nourishing, changes the nutritional landscape of the entire week that follows. Your body is the vehicle for everything else in this audiobook. The quality of your mind, your relationships, your creativity, your financial ambition. All of it runs through the physical machine you inhabit. Treat it like the irreplaceable instrument it is. 1 hour a day. Chapter 5. 1 hour for your skills. Deliberate practice. There is a person you have always wanted to become. Someone who speaks another language, or plays an instrument, or writes with clarity and power, or codes, or paints, or builds things with their hands. Someone with a skill that marks them as capable, distinctive, creative, or uncommonly useful. For most people, that person exists permanently in the future, always becoming, never arrived, not because the goal is unreachable, but because it never gets the time it needs. In the early 1990s, psychologist K. Anders Ericsson conducted a series of studies at the Berlin Academy of Music that would eventually reshape how we think about talent and expertise. He and his colleagues studied violin students. Dividing them into three groups based on their skill level: those expected to become world-class soloists, those expected to become professional performers, and those expected to become music teachers. The single variable that most reliably separated the groups was not natural aptitude, musical background, or even the quality of their instruction. It was the number of hours they had spent in what Erickson called deliberate practice. By age 20, the best violinists had accumulated an average of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. The good ones, around 8,000. The future teachers, around 4,000. The implication, later popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers as the 10,000-hour rule, was that expertise is largely a function of accumulated, focused practice rather than innate talent. Erickson was careful to specify what made practice deliberate. It wasn't just repetition. Simply doing something over and over does not necessarily produce improvement. Deliberate practice has specific characteristics. It operates at the edge of your current ability, requires full concentration, involves immediate feedback, and includes targeted efforts to correct weaknesses rather than simply reinforce strengths. This last point is worth sitting with. Most people, when they practice something, gravitate toward the parts they already do well. The pianist runs through the easy passages again and again. The writer rewrites their best paragraphs. We do this because competence feels good, and because the parts we struggle with are uncomfortable. But the research is unambiguous. Growth lives in the uncomfortable parts. And the way you improve is by spending the bulk of your practice time on the things that are hard for you. 1 hour per day of genuine, deliberate practice in any skill domain adds up to roughly 365 hours in a year. Language learning researchers estimate that reaching conversational fluency in a language similar to your own requires around 600 to 750 hours of study. That means in 2 years of a daily hour, you could be conversationally fluent in French, Spanish, Italian, or Portuguese. In 3 to 4 years, the same dedicated hour moves you toward proficiency in more complex languages like Mandarin or Arabic. For musical instruments, research suggests that consistent, focused practice for around 1,500 hours produces a level of skill that most listeners would describe as impressive. That's 4 years of daily hours. 4 years sounds like a long time, but 4 years will pass regardless of whether you're practicing or not. The only question is who you'll be when they do. The skill you choose matters, but perhaps less than you think. Any skill practice deliberately builds not only the skill itself, but also the meta skill of learning. The capacity to improve at things deliberately, to tolerate frustration, to stay with difficulty long enough to break through it. People who have mastered one skill through deliberate practice find that subsequent skills come more quickly. Not because learning gets easier, but because their relationship with the process of learning changes. Choose a skill that calls to you, something you've wanted for years, something that makes you lean forward slightly when you think about who you'd be if you had it, and then show up for it, 1 hour, 1 day at a time, with the patience to know that the accumulation of those hours is building something invisible for a very long time before it becomes visible. And then one day, sooner than you expect, someone will hear you play or read what you wrote or listen to you speak in another language, and they'll call it talent. You can smile because you'll know what it actually is. Chapter 6. 1 hour for your relationships. In 1938, Harvard University began what would become the longest study of human adult development ever conducted. They enrolled 268 Harvard sophomores and began tracking them, their health, their careers, their relationships, their happiness, following them for decades. They expanded the study to include men from Boston's inner-city neighborhoods. Eventually, they began following the children of the original participants as well. What they found after more than 80 years of data collection was at once surprising and deeply clarifying. Of all the variables they measured, wealth, fame, professional achievement, physical health, the single strongest predictor of human happiness and longevity was not any of those things. It was the quality of a person's close relationships. The people who were most connected, who had warm, trusting, reciprocal relationships with others, lived longer, were physically healthier, retained their memory and cognitive function longer, and reported far greater life satisfaction than those who were isolated or whose relationships were marked by conflict and superficiality. As the study's longtime director, Robert Waldinger, summarized in his widely viewed TED Talk, good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. And yet relationships, deep, nourishing, genuinely connecting relationships, are perhaps the area of modern life most systematically neglected. We understand abstractly that they matter, and then we let weeks pass without calling a friend. We sit next to the people we love most at a dinner table while scrolling through our phones. And we have hundreds of social media connections and nobody to call at 2 in the morning. Relationships don't maintain themselves. They are living things that require investment, not grand gestures made twice a year, but small, consistent deposits of attention and care. An hour dedicated to your relationships each day is not about scheduling romance or engineering friendship. It's about presence, about choosing, in that hour, to fully attend to the people who matter most. This could look like a dinner at which your phone is genuinely out of sight and you ask your partner questions you've never thought to ask. It could be a walk with a friend where you talk about the things that actually matter, not just the surface events of the week. It could be reading to your child, not with one eye on the clock, but slowly, attentively, letting them ask questions, noticing their reactions. Research on what makes couples happy consistently points to something simple and almost mundane: the ratio of positive to negative interactions. The psychologist John Gottman, after decades of studying couples in his laboratory, found that stable, happy relationships tend to have a ratio of around 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative one. Not dramatic acts of love, small things, a warm glance, a question asked with genuine interest, laughter, a touch on the shoulder. These micro moments of connection, accumulated over years, are the infrastructure of a great relationship. For friendships, research shows that the strongest adult friendships are built not on shared history alone, but on ongoing shared experience. People who see each other regularly, who are present in the ordinary texture of each other's lives. The friendships that fade are almost always the ones that relied on proximity and never learned to survive distance through intentional contact. 1 hour a day is enough to transform your most important relationships, not because an hour solves deep wounds or repairs years of neglect, but because an hour of genuine, undistracted presence communicates something that months of coexistence cannot: that you chose to be here, that the person in front of you is worth your most finite resource, that you see them. In a world of endless distraction, being truly seen by another person is rarer than we admit, and offering that to someone, the gift of your full, unhurried attention, is one of the most powerful things a human being can give. Chapter 7: 1 hour for your finances. Money is one of the most emotionally charged subjects in human life, and also one of the most avoidable. Many people spend their entire adult lives in a kind of deliberate financial fog, earning, spending, occasionally worrying, but never quite looking clearly at the numbers, never quite making a plan, never quite understanding how the system works and how to make it work for them. The cost of this avoidance is enormous. Not because money is the point of life, it isn't, but because financial stress is one of the leading causes of anxiety, marital conflict, poor sleep, and diminished well-being across virtually every demographic. The irony is that the overwhelming majority of personal financial problems are not caused by insufficient income, so they are caused by an absence of intention, the lack of a plan for where money goes, what it's for, and how to make it grow. 1 hour per day dedicated to your financial life will not make you wealthy overnight, but over a year, it will do something more valuable. It will give you clarity, and financial clarity, knowing what you earn, what you spend, what you owe, what you own, and where you're headed, is the foundation on which every other financial improvement is built. In the early weeks of building this habit, that hour might be spent simply understanding your current situation. Most financial advisors agree that the single most powerful starting exercise is a budget. Not a complicated spreadsheet, but a clear, honest accounting of money in and money out. What arrives in your account each month and where it all goes. When for most people who do this seriously for the first time, the experience is revelatory. Subscription services forgotten and never canceled. Restaurant spending that has crept to startling levels. Small daily purchases that, added up across a month, represent hundreds of dollars. From clarity comes control, and from control, even modest control, comes one of the most powerful forces in personal finance, the ability to save. The mathematics of saving are almost embarrassingly in your favor if you start early and stay consistent. $100 invested monthly from age 25, growing at an average market return of 7%, becomes nearly $250,000 by retirement. The same investment started at 35 produces about half of that. Time is the engine. Consistency is the fuel. The hour you invest in financial education is among the highest return activities available to an ordinary person. Understanding basic concepts, compound interest, index funds, tax-advantaged accounts, the difference between assets and liabilities, is not complicated. It does not require a finance degree. It requires a few hours of reading, applied over weeks, with the intention to actually use what you learn. Books like The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, or The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley provide accessible, research-backed frameworks for thinking about money that most people never receive in school. A single book in this category, read with genuine attention, can change the financial decisions of a lifetime. Your financial hour can also be used to build income. In a connected world, the ability to earn money outside of a traditional job has never been more accessible. Skills you've developed over years, writing, design, coding, coaching, teaching, consulting, can be converted into income streams that supplement your primary salary. 1 hour a day building a side skill or a small creative business is how many people quietly build a second income over 2 to 3 years without disrupting their primary life. Financial freedom is not about being rich. It's about having enough and knowing what enough looks like for you. It's about removing money as a source of daily stress, creating enough of a cushion that life's inevitable surprises don't become catastrophes, and building slowly and deliberately toward a future you've actually chosen rather than one that just happened to you. 1 hour. 1 day at a time. Watch what changes. Chapter 8. 1 hour for creativity. Somewhere along the path from childhood to adulthood, most of us were quietly separated from our creative selves. Not through any single dramatic moment, but through the gradual accumulation of practical demands, schoolwork, careers, responsibilities, and the slow internalization of an idea that is, on examination, completely false. That creativity is a talent possessed by some and absent in others. It isn't. Creativity is not a gift. It is a capacity, one that exists in every human brain, one that atrophies without use and flourishes with practice, exactly like a muscle. The neuroscience is unambiguous on this point. Creative thinking is not a mysterious process that happens in special people. It is a mode of cognitive functioning, specifically, the interaction between the brain's default mode network, responsible for imagination and daydreaming, its executive control network, responsible for focused attention, and its salience network, responsible for switching between the two. And like any cognitive mode, it improves with regular activation. People who practice creative thinking, who regularly engage in activities that require making something new, become better at creative thinking, not just in that specific domain, but generally. Creative practice builds a mental flexibility, an ability to hold multiple possibilities at once, to find unexpected connections, to resist the immediate obvious answer in favor of something better. The form your creative hour takes matters less than the fact of it. Writing, even private writing in a journal never meant to be read, is one of the most powerful forms of creative practice because it demands that you translate the vague and formless chaos of inner experience into specific, communicable language. This act of translation is cognitively demanding in the most valuable way. It forces precision. It clarifies thinking. Research by psychologist James Pennebaker found that people who wrote about their deepest thoughts and experiences for just 20 minutes a day showed improvements in immune function, fewer doctor visits, and measurably greater psychological well-being. Writing is not just art, it is processing. Drawing, painting, photography, music, cooking as an art form, woodworking, ceramics, knitting, any activity in which you are making something that didn't exist before qualifies. And what matters is that you are creating rather than consuming, producing rather than receiving, choosing rather than being chosen for. There is a concept in creativity research called divergent thinking, the ability to generate many possible solutions to a problem, to see in multiple directions rather than one. Divergent thinking is associated not just with artistic creativity, but with problem solving in every domain of life, from business to science to interpersonal conflict. People who practice creative activities regularly score significantly higher on measures of divergent thinking. They are, in measurable ways, more innovative and more adaptive. The creative hour requires a particular kind of protection because creativity is fragile in ways that exercise or reading are not. It requires a degree of psychological safety, the sense that what you're making doesn't have to be good, that you are not being evaluated, that the process itself is the point rather than the product. The internal critic that lives in every creative person, the voice that says this is bad, this isn't as good as what other people make. Who do you think you are? Is the single greatest threat to a creative practice. The antidote, discovered through practice rather than intention, is volume. When you commit to making things consistently, to filling pages, canvases, recordings, sketches, the internal critic loses power. Not because it goes away, but because you're no longer trying to make a masterpiece. You're trying to show up. And in that showing up, stripped of the pressure of perfection, something remarkable sometimes appears. What to give yourself permission to make things that are bad. Make them anyway. Make them every day. The quality will come. Slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. Chapter 9. 1 hour for stillness. Mindfulness and reflection. We live in the noisiest period of human history, not just acoustically, though that too, but informationally, cognitively, emotionally. At any given moment, the average modern person has access to more stimulation than any human who ever lived before them. News from every corner of the world, entertainment on demand, the opinions of millions of strangers, the highlight reels of everyone they've ever known, the constant low-grade vibration of notifications that never quite stops. Against this backdrop, the practice of stillness is not a luxury. It is increasingly a survival skill. Mindfulness, the practice of bringing deliberate, non-judgmental attention to present moment experience, has been studied rigorously over the past 40 years. And the body of research is striking in its consistency. Regular mindfulness practice reduces symptoms of anxiety and depression. It lowers cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. It improves working memory and attentional control. It reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, making practitioners measurably less reactive to stress. It has been shown to reduce pain, improve immune function, and change the actual structure of the brain over time, increasing gray matter density in regions associated with emotional regulation and self-awareness. And yet, and this is worth sitting with, mindfulness requires almost nothing. No equipment, no special environment, no membership. It asks only that you stop, breathe, and attend to what is here, right now, without trying to change it. The simplest form of mindfulness practice is breath-focused meditation, sitting quietly for a period of time, directing attention to the physical sensation of breathing, and gently returning that attention whenever the mind wanders, which it will constantly, especially at first. The returning is the practice. Every time you notice the mind has drifted and bring it back without judgment, you are doing a kind of mental repetition, training the muscle of attention in exactly the way physical exercise trains the muscle of the body. 20 to 30 minutes of daily meditation has been shown to produce measurable neurological and psychological changes within 8 weeks. For those who find sitting meditation difficult, walking meditation, mindful yoga, or even mindful eating can produce similar benefits through the same core mechanism: sustained, non-judgmental attention to present experience. But the hour for stillness can go beyond formal meditation. Reflection, deliberate thinking about your own experience, values, and direction, is perhaps the most underutilized practice available to serious individuals. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome, the Japanese concept of Hansai, the Ignatian tradition of the exam, across cultures and centuries, the practice of ending the day with structured self-examination appears again and again as a mark of those who live with intention. A simple reflective practice. At the end of each day, spend 10 to 15 minutes with these questions. What happened today that I'm grateful for? What did I learn? Where did I fall short of who I want to be? And what do I want to do differently tomorrow? This is not self-criticism, it is calibration, the regular checking of actual direction against intended direction, the small course corrections that keep a life moving towards something chosen rather than something accidental. Journaling as reflection deserves special mention. The act of writing about your thoughts and feelings does something that thinking alone cannot do. It externalizes the contents of the mind. It makes the interior visible. And what becomes visible can be examined, questioned, revised. People who journal regularly develop what psychologists call greater narrative coherence, a more integrated, intentional sense of their own story and identity. They are better at learning from experience, better at identifying patterns in their own behavior. Turan, in numerous studies, measurably happier and more psychologically resilient. In the hour for stillness, you are doing something that the pace of modern life conspires against at every turn. You are simply being present, present to yourself, to your experience, to the questions that genuinely matter. In a world that profits from your distraction, that hour is a quiet act of resistance and one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself. Summary, Chapter 10. Building your 1-hour life system. We've covered a lot of ground, 9 domains of human flourishing, each one illuminated with research, each one showing how a single dedicated hour can shift the trajectory of that part of your life. And if you've been listening carefully, you may have noticed a problem forming in the back of your mind. 10 hours a day, that's not 1 hour. That's a second job. You're right to notice that. And it brings us to perhaps the most important chapter of this entire audiobook. The one about integration, sustainability, and the art of building a life system that actually works for you. The chapters in this book are not a prescription for 10 simultaneous daily commitments. They are a menu, a map of possibility, showing you the domains where an invested hour pays the highest dividends. And your task is not to do all of them. Your task is to identify the ones that matter most to you right now, given who you are and where you are in your life, and to build a realistic system around those. A reasonable starting point for most people. Choose 2 or 3 areas to invest in simultaneously. Perhaps your body and your mind, exercise and reading combined across a morning routine. Perhaps your relationships and your stillness. An evening hour that includes dinner without phones followed by brief journaling. Perhaps your financial education and your creative practice. A lunch break used for learning about personal finance, and 30 minutes of writing before bed. The specifics matter less than the architecture. What you're building is not a list of things to do. You're building a life structure, a shape that your days reliably take. Behavioral scientists call this a routine, but it's more than that. It's an identity in action, the external form of the person you are becoming. As you design your system, a few principles from the research deserve your attention. First, morning habits are typically more durable than evening ones. The morning is governed by you. The evening is governed by accumulation, the fatigue, demands, and unexpected events of everything that came before it. If you have an hour that truly matters to you, and you can find a way to place it in the morning, your consistency rate will likely be higher. Second, batch-related activities. Exercise and related reading, a podcast during your walk, combine naturally. Financial review and journaling can happen in sequence. To skill practice and the mental engagement of learning often pair well. Finding natural combinations reduces the cognitive overhead of transitioning between completely unrelated activities and makes your hour feel more like a coherent block than a fragmented checklist. Third, plan for failure. Every system, no matter how well designed, will encounter disruption. Travel, illness, family crises, brutal work weeks. Life will reliably interrupt even the most committed practice. The question is not how to prevent this. The question is, what is your plan for getting back on track when it happens? Research on habit recovery shows that the most dangerous moment for any habit is not the first disruption, but the second. Missing one day has almost no long-term effect on a well-established habit. Missing 2 days in a row begins to erode the neural pathways that support it. The rule many successful habit practitioners follow: never miss twice. 1 day off is rest. 2 days off is the beginning of a new pattern. Fourth, measure what matters, but don't worship the measurement. Tracking your habits, a simple journal log, an app, marks on a calendar, provides both useful data and motivational reinforcement. Seeing a streak of consistent days creates what habit researchers call a commitment device. You become reluctant to break the streak. But measurement can also become tyrannical. If a missed day sends you into a spiral of self-recrimination and shame, the tracking has become counterproductive. The goal is consistency over time, not perfection. You are building a life, not running a productivity experiment. Fifth, and perhaps most important, stay connected to the why. Habits maintained purely through willpower eventually fail because willpower is finite and life is relentless. The habits that last are the ones connected to something deeper, a value, a vision, a version of yourself that matters to you. Why do you want to read more? Not just to be smarter, but what would knowing more do for the life you're trying to build? Why do you want to get physically stronger? What would that health make possible? Who would you be? Who could you help? The hours in this book are not ends in themselves. They are expressions of intention, daily, lived-out commitments to a self you are always in the process of becoming. When the commitment is rooted in something that genuinely matters to you, it carries its own energy. It doesn't need constant willpower. How turn it becomes over time simply what you do. Start small, smaller than you think you need to. One habit, protected fiercely, built into an automatic pattern before you add a second. The temptation after reading something like this is to launch into a grand reinvention, to overhaul everything at once, to run toward the version of yourself you want to be. Resist that impulse, not because it comes from a bad place, but because the research is unambiguous. Sustainable change is almost always slower and smaller at the start than we want it to be. The architecture of a transformed life is built one brick at a time. Each hour is a brick, and you have hours available to you every single day. Imagine it's 2 years from now, not 10 years, not some distant future requiring spectacular patience. Just 2 years. You have been reading for an hour a day. You have consumed between 30 and 40 books, not classics read under obligation, but books you chose, books that called to you, books that changed the way you see the world, your work, your relationships, yourself. You know things you didn't know. You ask questions you couldn't have formulated before. Your thinking has a texture it didn't have 2 years ago. You have been moving your body consistently, not training for a marathon, not suffering through a workout you hate, just moving regularly in a way that fits your life. Your energy is different. The afternoon slump that used to derail your days has mostly disappeared. Your sleep is deeper. You climb stairs without noticing. You feel in a way you haven't felt in years, like someone who inhabits their body rather than just drags it around. You have been practicing a skill, 2 years of daily focused practice. You play the instrument you always wished you played, or you write with a fluency that still occasionally surprises you, or you speak a second language haltingly but genuinely. You are nowhere near finished, but you are somewhere you never were before. Your closest relationships are different, not because you have said more meaningful things, but because you have been more present. Because you put your phone down at dinner and asked real questions. Because you called the friend you'd been meaning to call for 3 years. Because you listened, actually listened, when the people you love were talking. When the depth is different now, the safety is different. Your finances are clearer. You understand where your money goes. You have an emergency fund that didn't exist 2 years ago. You've started investing, modestly, consistently, automatically. And you understand enough about how it works to feel calm rather than anxious about the future. The money panic that used to arrive at 3 in the morning has quieted. You make things, something you created, a story, a painting, a piece of furniture, a garden, exists in the world that didn't before you put your hands to it. You have learned that the worst thing you make is still something, and something is infinitely more than nothing. And you have stillness, a practice of returning each day to the quiet place inside yourself where clarity lives. When a habit of reflection that keeps you honest about who you are and intentional about who you're becoming. A capacity for presence that the noise of the world can no longer entirely colonize. None of this required a different life, a different city, a different job, a different income, a different set of circumstances. It required only one thing, 1 hour claimed deliberately, day after day after day. That is what's available to you, right now, today. Not in some future version of your life when things are calmer, when the kids are older, when the job is less demanding, when the moment is finally right. The moment will never be perfectly right. There will always be a reason to wait. There has always been a reason to wait. And waiting is exactly how years pass without the life you wanted taking shape. The hour exists. It existed yesterday and the day before, and all the days you've been alive. It will exist tomorrow. You can let it drift, as it has been drifting, into screens and noise, and the passive blur of a life lived mostly on autopilot. Or you can take it back, decide who you want to be, then use your hour to become that person, one ordinary, irreplaceable day at a time. The life on the other side of this decision is waiting for you. It always has been.